Good morning and happy Women's Day today and always. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Celebrating Women's Day in a Heating World, the Role of Women in the Climate Justice Struggle, and the launch of the Democratic Marxism book, Volume 7, titled Emancipatory Feminism in the Time of COVID-19, Transformative Resistance and Social Reproduction. Today's program is a two-part program. The first part will be a discussion on the role of women in the climate justice struggle, and the conversation will be chaired by Comrade Ruth Tlokotse. This conversation takes place in August, just after July of 2023, which was the hottest month ever recorded in terms of absolute global mean temperature. The second part of the program will be the launch of the 7th volume of the Democratic Marxism book series, Emancipatory Feminism in the Time of COVID-19, Transformative Resistance and Social Reproduction. We had several monthly online talks by contributors to this volume. All these talks are available in the COPEC YouTube channel. I'll put the link in the chat. This 7th volume of Democratic Marxism book series is dedicated to Mamfikile Nchangas, who paid the ultimate price in the struggle for climate and more generally, environmental justice. She was gunned down in her kitchen in front of her 11-year-old grandson on the 22nd of October in 2020. I request that we all observe a moment of silence and remember her courageous spirit. Thank you very much. Malibongwe Kamalama Kosikas. I will now hand over to Comrade Ruth Tlokotse, who will chair the first panel. She is the co-editor of DM Volume 7 and is the president of the South African Federation of Trade Unions. Kate Ruth, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Charles. Let me also join the queue in greeting everyone present in this webinar. Firstly, let me also acknowledge the role played by women who lost their lives, women who are still receiving the death rate, women that are still advancing the struggle of emancipatory justice. You know, I was having a discussion with one of my colleagues earlier on this morning as to whether must we celebrate this Women's Day or even the month of August. And personally, I'm of the firm view that from the trade union side, as a trade unionist, I feel that there's absolutely nothing to celebrate. But the comrade was of the firm view that for the mere fact that as women, we are having a discussion, that on its own is worth to be celebrated. I guess today's discussion is going to take us to the next level. Of course, reflecting as to what should be our attitude as women, especially women of today. Whether the struggle that we are advancing, is it yielding any positive outcome in terms of fighting the climate change? I guess these are some of the things that we need to have a proper discussion amongst ourselves. And without any waste of time, let me also take this opportunity and introduce the most important women who will be sharing their contribution in terms of the role of women in the climate justice struggle. Our first panelist is Comrade Dora Marema. Dora Marema has worked in a rural and urban settings with a variety of NGOs and sectors, focusing on issues of land reform, gender equality, and environmental justice. Comrade Dora is a senior Atlantic Fellow at Fellow and Atlantic Fellowship for Racial Equity. She founded Gender Commission Women for Climate Justice in 2008, an NGO working with civil society organization. She's an activist and an expert from the Southern African region, working for women's rights and gender and climate justice. She's the head of municipal sustainability at the Southern African Local Government Association, which is SALGA. The second participant is Comrade Ariel Saleh. She is currently a visiting scholar at Queen Mary University of London. She's a member of the Hong Kong-based Global University for Sustainability and has held recent appointment at Nelson Mandela University, University of Sweden, and Frederick Schiller University at Jena. Her best known book is Ecofeminism as Politics, Nature, Marx, and the Postmodern. And the other publication can be found from the www.arielsalah.info. Her embodied materialism is seminal to the study of humanity-nature relations by relocating regenerative value in care skills and indigenous knowledge. Salah challenged justice and sustainability discourse from the new liberal green economy to eco-socialism. This work builds on activist experience in the anti-nuclear movement, water politics, biodiversity protection, and support for Asia-Pacific women alternatives. She advises several editorial boards and was a founding editor of the US journal Capitalism, Nature Socialism. And then we are also having another panelist, Comrade Prex Govender, who is the author of Love and Courage, A Story of Insubordination. Her book is used locally and internationally by women's movement, trade unions, and universities to teach the power of reconnecting to dignity as inherent birthright as we work for freedom, equality, justice, and peace against racist, patriarchal, militarist, capitalist system that exploit and destroy humanity and the earth. The Love and Courage shares her writing, teaching, and yoga practices in struggles against apartheid and neoliberalism. Comrade Prex has worked as a feminist organizer, a teacher, a trade union educator, an MP and a human rights commissioner, and she's currently a senior associate at the Africa Gender Institute. These are the three panelists of women who are going to share their insight about the role of women in climate justice struggle. I'm going to first start by Comrade Udora. Comrade Dora, can you just take us through your insight about the role played by women in the struggle of climate justice? Over to you, my comrade.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Comrade Ruth, and thank you to COPAC and the comrades for making an opportunity for us to gather this day. I am truly humbled to be sharing the panel with such remarkable women that I look up to. I woke up this morning really thinking about Women's Day in particular. What does it mean for me? I woke up really I became very emotional about the current status and just having reflected just on the past weekend with another comrade of mine who worked for many years in the land struggle with us, and really looking at her life, and you know, she's right now suffering with ill health. And I was saying to her, it is really disheartening for us to be able to sit and to look back, and with all of the contribution that we believe we made at the time that we made, we are not able to see any fruit of it. It doesn't sound like we've made any contribution towards the struggle for fighting for equality, for access to land and resources. I think most recently around the climate justice struggle. One feels that there is really a lot that still needs to be done. But again, at the same time, I then sprung to encourage myself to say that, to still be alive, it means that there is still an opportunity for us to make a contribution. I think one of the critical issues that we are facing is that, there are multiple layers of struggles that we have to fight. Of course, right now, of top, priorities, the climate justice struggle, but there are other struggles that we shouldn't forget about. So, for example, the struggle against gender equality, and I was just talking in the beginning of this week about the fact that if we were to make sure that climate action works for women, it means that it will work for everyone. Because South Africa is one of the most unequal society. We have got, gender inequalities that still need to be addressed. And we are now here at a place where gender equality and climate justice are so interlinked that, we cannot address one without the other. So we know that in the climate crisis that we are facing, women and girls continue to bear the brunt of the negative impacts of the natural disasters that we've seen. I think Charles was just reciting, indicating to us that we face one of the hottest days yet, to be seen by this generation. And I think, we need to be able to put into perspective who are the people who are really bearing the brunt of all of that. We know that these disasters are increasing levels of poverty. They are escalating the gender-based violence as many of our people are fighting for access to resources. We know the drought that is ravaging across this country. We know the floods that are destroying the little infrastructure that we have in this country. And we have seen how COVID-19 has really amplified a lot of these inequalities. Yet, despite all of this, we are not seeing those that are affected the most, the majority in our populations, which is women, in creating and leading the climate change solutions. They are missing in climate leadership, they are missing in innovations, they're missing in the climate actions that are being put forward. So gender responsive climate and environmental action really must start by ensuring women that women have got equal access to productive resources. I'm particularly petty around the issues where we only think about women when we talk about cooking stoves and things like that. That, for us to be able to bring the voices of women, we need to think about how we can improve cooking stoves. Women have transcended far beyond being domesticated and being the one that stay at home to make sure that people are eating. Yes, our mothers' generations were those women, but we are not those women. We need access to productive resources. We need access to finance. We need access to land, water, and renewable energy. For us to be productive and to be productive members of this society. I want to believe that women are they're very clear about what they need. And I think many of us as policymakers and practitioners are the ones that needs to be educated about what women are doing and what do they need in this present age for them to be able to be part of the solution. So they need to be supported in terms of building their skills, continuing with the advocacy around these issues, accessing technology, and we can be able to do this when we are going into the ground and collecting the data that is disaggregated, knowing who in the communities or in the provinces where we work is impacted by what and who is doing what at this particular time. Because we also know that there are a lot of changes that are happening. There are a lot of gender roles that are happening that comes with the issues of climate change. And until we can do that, we won't be able to inform how we plan, how we budget, how we implement, and how we are going to monitor whether our interventions are actually resulting in any transformative action on the ground, which is where it is really needed the most. So we have to really think about coming up with solutions that are centering women's issues as they continue to fight for climate justice, as they continue to fight towards a greener economy. As I mentioned, that there are a lot of enabling environmental things that needs to be put in place for women to be able to respond to the current climate crisis. And we need to be bold and courageous about increasing women's leadership within the environmental and the climate justice movement and organization. Really make sure that they are there. We do not bring people that are supposed to be speaking for them, or even continuing to have engagements where many of us are speaking on their behalf. We need to build movements for equitable access to climate finance, equitable access to technologies and knowledge, opportunities that are coming with the transition that we have to make, where we are amplifying the voices of the grassroots and the indigenous women, and really look at building concrete actions that centers the advancement of gender equality to combat climate change for a more equal and sustainable world. I think we cannot postpone this any longer, and we cannot continue to rely on the data that was collected many, many years ago that continues to be recycled and generalized. It is time that women are really taking the center stage, and I think we also cannot keep on coming back around August to actually talk about women, because out of sight, it means you are out of mind. When we are planning and we are talking about solutions, we are not going to really think with women in our minds and to look at how will these solutions, or how will these projects, or how will these programs and campaigns that we come up with, how are they going to impact women, and what role can women be able to play? Because we only think about them when it comes to when we are wanting to celebrate the Women's Month. So I think I'm speaking to myself as well, all of us, that we need to be able to really have a perspective that centers around women, because I think if we can come up with solutions, interventions that centers around women and the women's issues, then they will be able to work for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Dora, for raising a number of issues. I guess comrades are noting, because there are quite a number of areas that needs to be engaged and enriched, so that coming out of this webinar, women must be able to speak for themselves. Women must be able to be part of the solution. I'm going to invite the next speaker, who's going to take us through also the role of women. It's Comrade Prex Govender. Comrade Prex, over to you. Comrade Prex.
Thanks very much, Comrade Ruth, and thank you very much to COPAC and to all who are present today. When I got the invitation, I was thinking about what would, and it's a question that was raised last week in the conference, the Gender Summit of the national and provincial legislatures that took place in KwaZulu-Natal. And the speaker of KZN raised the question of what would Victoria Mkenge, who had been assassinated by apartheid's brutal forces, want us to do today? And I responded by asking the question, what would Victoria say about the killing of the assassination of Comrade Fikile Mshangazi in front of her grandson in 2020? And I think what both of them were asking, or in that moment last week, of public representatives, is that when you're elected, who do you serve and whose interests do you advance? And there's a very clear tension that exists within the issues around gender and climate justice right now, where the tension is between the rights of the people, the rights of the earth, versus the rights of corporations. And so I'd like to speak to a particular question of power and how those who are elected into positions of power use that most effectively to understand what the root causes are that are driving inequality, that are driving poverty, that are driving violence and war, that are driving gender and climate injustice. And I want to take a particular example of something that was proposed which in fact has become government policy. In 1994, in the national budget debates, as a member of parliament, I proposed that we initiate something that has become known as gender responsive budgets. And the idea of that was to look at income, expenditure, and macroeconomic policy in the context of also challenging IMF policy, World Bank policy, which has been responsible for increasing inequality through currently austerity policies. And the gender responsive budget framework that has been adopted by South Africa's government, by Treasury and Cabinet, has been drafted by the IMF. And what I urged parliamentarians to do last week was to ensure that they use their power of public participation and of oversight to ask the people of our country whether this framework is capable of realizing the constitutional promise to gender equality, to non-sexism, to bodily integrity, and to no discrimination on any grounds, including sexual orientation. And the question also of the role of corporate power was raised by an input from the National Action Plan, who talked about the commitment that corporations have given to contribute to South Africa and to contribute to the realization of the Constitution. And again, the question was, how will people elected as public representatives use their power, but also the whole of society use the power that we have to interrogate that commitment? Because some of those corporations include, the top ones that she mentioned were Shell, BP, etc. Those are the same corporations that that sponsor the biggest corporations, Coca-Cola, etc., that sponsor the big climate conferences. There's an inherent contradiction in that. If we don't examine what are the root causes, we'll never be able to shift the growing inequality, the growing climate and gender injustice in our world, because the root causes remain untouched, uninterrogated. And I think the power of this gathering, the power of gatherings similar to this across this country today, is the clarity that people are bringing to an analysis of the root causes, of understanding a racist, capitalist, patriarchal, militarist world that we live in, and how that drives that. So, for example, the IMF puts forward the gender responsive budget framework, and one of the examples they give is their work in Ukraine. And yet, simultaneous to doing what they call the gender responsive budget in Ukraine was also to insist that gas and land, agricultural land, be privatized, so that this became owned by the oligarchs, and the prices of gas and food went up, skyrocketed in Ukraine. So what is the intersection between economic, political, social, environmental? What are the intersections? What happens in the water and sanitation hearings in the Human Rights Commission that I chaired across the country some years ago? The question of how do you bring to bear an analysis of the lived reality of people who do not have access to water, for example, because not just because of corruption and inefficiencies, which are very real and must be tackled, but also the ownership of water. So during the drought in Cape Town, the city's statistics showed that less than 3% of Cape Town's water was used by people in informal settlements. The poorest people in our province used less than 3% of Cape Town's water, according to the city's own statistics. At the same time, a PAIA application showed that 10 of the biggest users of Cape Town's water was included Coca-Cola and Chevron. So the need, if we're wanting to look at climate justice and gender justice, is to connect all the dots. And I think this has been done at many times. And I think I would also say that one of the things we need to do is to ensure the connection between the productive and the reproductive, and what happens in arenas of the economy, and what happens when there are cuts to healthcare, education, food, and social security, and who carries the cost of that, and how that increases the unpaid care work that women are doing, largely because of unequal gendered roles and responsibilities across the country and across the world. And so I think I would like to stop there, and then hopefully during the questions, we'll be able to engage further. Thank you very much, everyone. And I look forward to listening further.
Okay. No, thank you so much, Comrade Pratt, for the insight as well. I'm now going to call upon our last panelist, Comrade Ariel Salah, just to take us through perhaps the international struggles against the climate change. Comrade Allah? Comrade Ariel Salah, apologies.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you for inviting me to join you. And I must say that I'm always blown away by the hotbed of activism that is Johannesburg. And Justice Charter Project is very impressive and very comprehensive in its ambition to draw together ecology, workers, women's, indigenous movements, and so on. It's fabulous. And the other South African project, which I've long admired, of course, is the Women organization across your continent, and particularly noting that they presented an ecofeminist manifesto at one of the COP meetings not so long ago. My comments are less activist-based today. More, I'm speaking as a sociologist and reviewing some of the, I suppose, analyses that women have made on the connection between women and climate, particularly with the assertion that the climate crisis, its causes, its effects, its solutions are all thoroughly sex-gendered. The ecological footprint is sex-gendered. Now, that is not to say that there's some intrinsic difference between men and women at a fundamental level. We are talking about a structural phenomenon. It is the division of labor between men and women, which is responsible, I think, for the cultural politics of climate. So we need to look at the division of labor. But first of all, I want to celebrate the leadership of women in climate politics internationally over the last several decades. Has been phenomenal. I mean, today, I think from Uruguay, the World Rainforest Movement is continually advancing its critique of global capital and its impacts. And coming out of China, I'm thinking of the women organizing the Global University for Sustainability, Kimchi Lau and Tui, and many other women who are pushing for food sovereignty, for protection of traditional production techniques, and with a view to protecting climate. We go back several decades. I'm thinking in the 1980s and 90s, when in the UK, the Women's Environment Network did a massive survey across their country and found that the difference between men and women surveyed, 80% of women were critically concerned about the ecological crisis and climate in particular. Not long after this, the Swedish government allowed a researcher called Gerd Johnson-Latham to look into the causes of climate change from a sex-gendered point of view. And she found the issue was very closely connected with men's feeling of entitlement, which affected their consumer choices. We're talking about European men here, of course. Consumer choices and a deferral of risk, deferral of a displacement of consequences as a result of the consumption that they were involved with. I might say that Johnson Latham received massive kickback for her research and was subject to a lot of abuse online and publicly in newspapers for her involvement in this heartbreaking research. From Costa Rica, we have Ana Ayla, a young Peruvian sociologist who examined the effects, the sex gendering, the effects of climate policy, and looking at the notion of deferred responsibility, looking at responses in Costa Rica to the clean development mechanism, the UN policy allowing countries in the global north and Canada and specifically to appropriate forest areas where Indigenous Costa Rican communities were then displaced in the name of the clean development mechanism and found themselves wandering into the cities in search of a livelihood. Invariably, it fell to the women of communities to take up any work they could find, and invariably it was sex tourism. So again, it was a win-win for the global north and women carrying the costs of that particular climate policy. The German women had a fascinating organization called GenderNet, which was very active around the turn of the millennium in UN agencies. And they identified, in terms of sex gendering of solutions to climate crisis, was the tendency for a masculinist policy to go for end of pipe solutions, the check fix. Let it rip, let the development go, and then fix it at the end of the day. Another German sociologist, actually, feminist sociologist, was Maike Spitzner, who was looking at solutions, sex-gendered solutions, but from a feminist perspective, suggesting that in fact, if we examined women's reproductive labours based on the multitasking they do in families, in community, we have there the sources of a solution to climate rectification. After all, women are socialized for contingency. They must move from dealing with tasks in the family, with tasks in the neighborhood, with productive work, with reproductive work, and so on. And this flexibility and this multitasking is very closely, it's quite ecological in a sense. From that insight and the importance of recognizing the importance of reproductive labor, which has fallen to women under the global division of labor, we look at what is reproductive labor. Reproductive labor is work that bridges human existence with natural processes. So it's the interplay between humanity and nature. This again points to the essential role of women as activists, climate activists. But it's not only women who are mothers in families involved in reproductive labor. Peasant food growers are engaged in reproductive labors. Indigenous gatherers and fishers are involved in reproductive labors. I myself find that the kinds of skilling involved in dealing with those natural processes is common across those different groupings. And I call it meta-industrial labor. It's labor that is outside of the industrial system. And yet if it was not for the existence of that labor, capitalism would not survive. So this meta-industrial class, people, mothers, peasants, indigenous, form a single class outside of the industrial system and unspoken, unnamed as a class. But this class has enormous political potential in ecological politics. And we do, I just flashed this book, I don't know whether you can see, we wrote about this in 2009, a whole bunch of ecological feminists from around the world made contributions analysing some of the points that I've been sharing with you now. Now, each of these groupings, peasants, indigenous, and so forth, is, in a sense, capitalism is in debt to each of them. There's an embodied debt owed to mothers. There's an ecological debt to nature at large. There's post-colonial debt. There's intergenerational debt to the next coming. This is not currently taken into account of in our assessments of justice or reparations, but it could be. In terms of meta-industrials, I think we have the example of Via Campesina in Indonesia, or they've also, of course, been active in Africa as well, whose local knowledge constitutes a people science, a systemic alternative, and it's one that's internationally shared among meta-industrial peoples. And as they say, our way of life falls down the earth. So we are looking, I think, at a political convergence that fits very closely with your climate justice charter. Convergence of ecological, sex-gendered, race and class movements, and basically each of these struggles being embedded in and grounded in a transformation, an ecocentric transformation, grounded in the earth and our care for the earth. So they're my thoughts to share with you on this Women's Day.
Thank you so much, Comrade Errol. I think the information you just presented to us is very much assisting, because sharing experiences from various countries, it's very crucial, especially when it comes to learning from each other. it will respond to what Comrade Prex has actually indicated, that we need to examine the root cause of the power, the corporate power. What is the role of the corporate power, the role of people's power in relation to the funding of a climate justice. I think those experiences are very much crucial so that we can be able to learn from them. And at the same time, before I can open hands from the participants for comments and questions, there are other aspects that I feel that I need just to lift them up. They are crucial for consideration, especially for this webinar. Is that what came out very strong? It's the interconnection between production and reproduction. The gender justice and the climate justice are interlinked. We cannot separate the two of them. So meaning that when we advance each struggle, we must make it a point that we don't separate the two. And Dora, you spoke at length about the importance of women standing up for themselves, women ensuring that they are part of the solutions. Women should make it a point that they are given resources so that as and when decisions are made, they must be in a position of deciding for themselves, because the climate change, it impacts negatively towards women. And you spoke about the collecting of data, that the data that we are currently having, it might be outdated. So we need the fresh data so that in doing the gender role, we must be in a position of knowing the budget that must be allocated, especially when it comes to interventions for transformation. So we also spoke about creating an enabling environment, that there has to be an enabling environment created so that women must be allowed to exercise or participate in the leadership role. Very interesting. And there must be a voice of the grassroots women. I think that one as well, we need to have a discussion pertaining it. But thank you so much, ladies, for sharing the insights about what should be the role of women, especially in this webinar, because we're not only supposed to be speaking about these issues only in August. I think this is what came out very strong from Comrade Dora, that it has to be a continuous discussion, that issues that are affecting women, we need not only to talk about them only in August. Of course, celebrating the role played by women who passed on while they were advancing this struggle. I'm going to allow comments from the participants, comments and questions to our panelists. I think the floor is open. Charles, perhaps you can help me to identify hands from our participants. The floor is open, comrades. I'm inviting hands and comments. I can see hands here. Charles, can you help me? There's a hand from Comrade Raymond.
Yes.
Yes, proceed, my leader.
Hi, sorry. I have load shedding at the moment, so at times I was a bit disconnected, so I apologize if I'm asking something that has already been mentioned. But I want to direct this question to Ariel Saleh. What did you find, because we're covering your work at the moment, what did you find the most difficult within your studies regarding feminism and the environment, or ecofeminism rather?
Many, many difficulties. I think the getting over the problem of binary thinking in terms of sex, gender, it's an ongoing issue. Even though as early as the 1980s, would you believe, I argued, published papers that that sex gender is a continuum, that there is no such thing as men here and women there, but people are born biologically across a whole range of kinds. And the template, masculine and here and feminine there, is imposed on them at birth. But of course, it becomes so potent in childhood socialization and so embedded in the kinds of institutions we have, patriarchal institutions, that people find it very difficult to think their way out of it, through it and out of it. And of course, the whole transgender issue, I don't know how big it is in your country at the moment, but internationally, it's imploding, and it is actually touching on the very basis of patriarchal socialization, which of course the climate crisis itself is an outgrowth of. But it's going to be very hard to help people to work through that. Another kind of difficulty with ecological feminism has actually been with my Marxist comrades. I consider myself a Marxist, but there is a kind of, dare I say it, patriarchalism within Marxist theory itself, and in the practice of Marxism, it creates a kind of solidarity among men on the left often, which is very difficult. It can be difficult to work with or to open up into a deeper analysis. I mean, I like to think that really we should consider the patriarchal system as the first kind of form of domination. That coloniality moves out of that, coloniality in the sense of invading and other people's territories and taking their resources. And finally, capitalism grows out of that in turn, that the three are, if you like, nested frames following each other through history, but are still interconnected. And the patriarchal energies and incentives flow through coloniality and into capitalism and maintain capitalism. This is not something that's widely explored in contemporary Marxism, but certainly the capitalism colonial thing is looked at, but in a rather reduced way. So I'd say those two areas are, for me, the most difficult, theoretically. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ariel. Are there any other comments, questions to our panelists? I don't see any hands. Okay, there's a hand from Comrade Pilisa and also Comrade Jane Beatty. Comrade Pilisa.
Thank you, Comrade Ruth, and thank you so much to the panelists for such a incisive inputs. I just want to ask the question specifically from to Pregs, and probably with a bit of a comment that does she really think that it's possible to achieve gender budgeting in the context where the public governance system, its basis is actually is based on the patriarchal system? Then that's the first, and I think that's in line with the gender budgeting and as well as planning. That's one. I think the second issue, it's really, I mean, I had making reference to IMF responsive budgeting. I know World Bank as well has developed the gender, gender responsive budgeting. Now, and I just wanted to reflect on whether these are just, piecemeal interventions so that these multilateral institutions become relevant, or there's a genuine commitment into making sure that they embed gender. And I'm asking the question particularly because both policies refer to gender mainstreaming, and we know the political dynamics associated with gender mainstreaming instead of a feminist economics approach. But the last issue, and I think this sits to any other of the speakers, is the fact that, and I want specifically to speak on the South African context, that there seem to be a gentleman's agreement, I think, which is based on obviously capitalist system around the fact that in the South African context, fiscal policy is used to subsidize the working class community in a form of all forms of cash grants or social security systems, while at the same time, the economy, the structural reforms are left untouched. And is there a possibility, in fact, that we're likely to remain with the same situation, or there is in your own assessment that there is some form of a commitment to shift and really commit to structural reforms over and above the transfers of social security to working class and Black women specifically? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade. The next speaker is Jane Beatty. Comrade Jane.
Thank you so much, Ruth, and thank you to the speakers. I think the panel was really intriguing in outlining specific things that we need to think about, especially where women are concerned in this climate struggle. My question is, and firstly, I would like to summarize what I've just picked from what the speakers have mentioned. So based on what the speakers have mentioned, I have realized that we need to somehow consider the needs of women, and for women to participate in their development and planning and funding that will help in this climate struggle. And that will help us to build adaptive capacity where women are concerned. So my question goes to the first speaker, I think it was Remy. How do you think we can do this practically in the South African context, where involving women to reflect and participate in the development of planning, especially where climate struggle is concerned, and to put strategies in place that could help women to spearhead these strategies?
Thank you so much, Comrade Jane. I think those were the two hands I've recognized so far. Let me start with Comrade Dora. Comrade Dora, then Comrade Prax after that. Comrade Dora? I think the last question.
So much. Yes, no, thank you so much, and I can answer to the last question. So when I'm talking about the involvement of women in the actual planning of any climate actions or interventions, we have the various processes that are mandating consultation and participation, at various levels of government, including in parliament. But again, I think most importantly, thinking about the sphere of government that is closest to the people, which is local government. We've got the integrated development planning that takes place, and I think it's important that there is mobilization at the grassroots level for communities, particularly women's groups, to be able to take part in those planning processes, to be able to make sure that that plan, which is, in my view, the blueprint of how a municipality needs to plan for delivery of services, that there is participation, and the issues that women are facing are actually finding expression in that. Because if it's not included in there, it's likely not also going to be budgeted for, and I think then that is really just the first step. And I think then there has to be an ongoing engagement to make sure that those plans are, as I said, firstly budgeted for. That secondly, that they are included in the programs that are going to be delivered, and then there is actual monitoring of making sure that the projects are actually being delivered. So and I know that it is a process that has really not worked for many years, and there's really fatigue and lethargy in terms of really holding local government responsible for making sure that process really is getting closer to the people, and that the issues that are central to the communities, particularly when you talk about the issues around climate justice and climate action, are included. There is currently a bill that we all know that is sitting in Parliament, the Climate Change Bill, which will become an act very soon. And it mandates that districts and metros ought to produce these climate actions in every 5 years. And I believe that once they are produced, they need to be integrated into the IDP as well. And I think that provides an opportunity. I think the one lever of local government, which is the community lever, has really not been very active. And I think it's time that we build movements that are going to make sure that communities are actually participating, because they are supposed to be part of that local governance. It says the political, administrative, and the community arm that needs to be activated. So that's really what I'm talking about in terms of making sure that those issues find expression, besides the other processes that mandates participation and consultation in the other spheres of government. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Dora. Can you have Comrade Prex?
Thanks very much. Just in relation to the question from Comrade Felisa around the IMF and the World Bank and whether there's a genuine commitment to gender responsive budgets. No, short answer. What they talk about as gender mainstreaming is male streaming into a capitalist, patriarchal, racist system that really is exploiting and destroying the earth and humanity. So it's so, for example, they separate gender from class. They don't include class in their analysis. They talk about increasing women in the formal economy, in the workplaces, but at the same time, they undermine work protections, the protections, labor protections. So they increase precarious work. There are cuts to areas such as healthcare, education, social security, etc., results in an increase in the load that women carry because of their gendered roles in terms of carrying the burden for unpaid care work, unrecognized work, and real contribution to our society. So I think that the question of how do you challenge that, the importance of ensuring and reclaiming our own initiatives. So in '94, this was an initiative by people in our country, by public representatives, by civil society, to ensure that the economic policy was recognized as critical in changing that economic policy, that it didn't serve a small minority of people, but changed the lives and changed the apartheid spatial geography of our country, which traps millions of people in inequality and in poverty. And so the question of how to do that, I think it's critical to ensure that the people across our country are saying, this is what we need. This is what we need in terms of food sovereignty. This is what we need in terms of ensuring work that is properly protected by the labor laws, by that there's decent wages and working conditions, from the farms to across every sector. And so the way in which those who are elected into power as public representatives use their power to regulate corporate power is a critical issue, because corporations, whether it's Shell or BP or whoever, their job is to make profits. That's what they're interested in. They're not interested in, for whatever the greenwashing is that takes place, they're not interested in saving the earth or in making sure that humanity is not exploited, that inequality ends, and that the connections between gender inequality, wealth inequality, income inequality, and issues of climate injustice are really deeply intertwined. In Cape Town, another example that I think brought to the fore some of these, the ways in which those who hold power at a global level influence what happens at local level. And I mean, I think this has happened with mining companies across the country, the assassinations of people like Figeli Nchingazi and others who have tried to fight for gender and climate justice is a very real problem. And how we actually begin to change and challenge that is by connecting, I think, in solidarity across a range of things and not allowing ourselves to be divided and put it against each other. So we blame each other for low wages and working conditions, water, not having access to water or land, etc. So the poor are put it against the poor. And there's a rise in xenophobia, in racism, in all kinds, in misogyny. So the ways in which we need to begin to challenge that is, how do we listen and value the work that people are doing across the country, and make sure that that work informs policy work, make sure that it informs changes and that are happening at a legislative level, a policy level, and that those changes are really are measured and evaluated in terms of the change, the impact of their change in gender inequality, in poverty, in violence, in gender-based violence, etc., across the country. Those are the things that we should see a change in. And at the moment, we don't see a change in it, because the kinds of and patriarchy, I think, does give rise. I think the way that incentive is still, it's seen through colonialism, it's seen through capitalism, as Ariel has already shared. And how you begin to change that, and how do you have genuine shifts with gender responsive budgeting is going to take a significant use of power across society and by elected public representatives. Thanks a lot for that.
Thank you so much, comrades. I can see there are a lot of, I think we've got around 73 comments in our chat box. And there are questions that are directed to all three of you, or participants. And unfortunately, the time allocated, we are not going to respond to most of the questions that have been posed. But Ariel, there's a question that is related to your book, that is it available here in South Africa? Perhaps if you can just respond in one word of a parting shot before we can move over to the next session. And perhaps to all three of you, and maybe before you can just come in, which is the question that I continuously ask, as to how do we collaborate? How do we make sure that all the information, common practice that you are having, you share with the grassroots organization, you share with labor, so that as and when we come to those processes, Comrade Dora of gender response budgeting, people are able to ask pertinent questions, because of in an absence of us having such information from the press, it's not going to be easier for us to be able to ask this difficult question, even to go to the root cause analysis. How do we make sure that we collaborate all social organizations that are here? We've got grassroots, we've got trade unions. Perhaps if you can just respond on that, all three of you, and 1 minute parting shot. I'll start with Comrade Ariel. Comrade Ariel, the book and the collaboration. Maybe perhaps if you can just reflect on that.
Let's say the question, one sentence. What is the question?
The question is, your book, the one that you've just shown us, is it available here in South Africa? I think there's a question from the chat box. And then the second issue is in relation to collaboration. How do you collaborate? How do you make sure that all organizations that are present in this platform, we share information so that they can be able to advance the struggle against the climate change?
Look, I have to say, I don't know which of my books are available in South Africa. I see Inga Connect is observing, and she teaches and feminism, and she may be up to date on books are available. Also, Vish, I think, uses some of the material, but if there is interest, I guess I could contact the publishers in London to make sure that, you know, that's the case. This book that I showed is actually not 2009, although there hasn't been kind of compendium more recently. It's still relevant. There's another book called Pluriverse, which we completed in 2019, which takes up this idea of a tapestry of alternative, which I think the Climate Justice Charter is interested in. And of course, ecofeminism as politics involves a dialogue with Marxism. Yes, well, I'm really not in a good position to comment on what's available in South Africa. Regarding activism, I started as an activist in 1970, and my first grassroots struggle was against uranium mining on Indigenous lands. And there have been many activist involvement since then, including the former Green Party and, oh my goodness, genetic engineering, campaigning, and so forth. So I'm pretty active on the web internationally. There's quite a lot of exchange of ecofeminist ideas into different groups. Feminist degrowth movement is very active at the moment. Yeah, that I'd have to think more about it, but yes, there's plenty. What I shared with you today was really more a reflection than a report on activist hands-on stuff, but it happens.
Okay, thank you so much. Parting shot, Comrade Dora, in the collaboration. Just a minute.
No, thank you so much, Comrade. I think, these kind of gatherings already signal what is possible. Having the different women coming from, different sectors, I think it's signaling what is possible. I think we just need to be able to get, beyond our silos. And I think, there are so many movements, more than we had 10 years ago. And I think right now we have really an opportunity to come together to build something that is more meaningful. That can withstand the test of time. There's a lot of information, as you say, it's sitting in various corners. And I think we are looking at movements like this the climate justice now, the issues around the climate debt and all of those things that should be able to pull us together. I can only speak for myself that even though I work for right now for local government association, I am first and foremost, a comrade of this movement. I come from Earthlife Africa and all its formations, and I'm always available. I am a member of a community where I come from in Limpopo, where I'm born, but also here in Krugersdorp, where I live, and I continue to be active in these communities. I know that there are many people like myself who are very passionate about the environmental movement and making sure that we are able to get to where we are needed. So I think we have an opportunity. We have a common crisis to face, which doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter who you are. You are going to be affected in one way or the other. It's just that more other people are affected more than others. And I think that in itself should be able to be something that pulls us together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Comrade Dora. Comrade Prex?
Thanks very much. In terms of collaboration, I think that I just like to share that there are organizations from unions to universities who've taken relevant sections of Love and Courage, just simply photocopied it, set up circles of reading groups and discussed and used it. So it's a creative, so people can tell their own stories because they have their own, they bring their own information from different parts of the world in different communities across this country and elsewhere. So I think that's absolutely, people are free to do that. I think the book itself may not be available in the stores any longer. In terms of sharing information with the AG, the Africa Gender Institute, where I'm based at the moment, we'll be launching a podcast later this year. And as soon as there's the clear details of that, I will share it so that it can be circulated in different different forums and networks. Obviously, where time allows, I'm also available to participate in educational seminars or workshops or ways in which people can actually create space to think critically and creatively through the challenges that we face. Thanks very much.
No, thank you so much, ladies. Thank you for your insight, and it's really much appreciated. And I guess the organizers of the session, they will be able to take us to the next level. Like it was said, that it's not only for the month of August, it has to be 365 days throughout advancing this struggle. And of course, the struggle cannot be won. Only, I think it needs a collaboration. There has to be, we need to hold each other's hand. We need to make it a point that those that are impacted are there to make it the point that their voice are heard. Thank you so much, ladies. This brings us to the end of this session. We are now moving over to the book launch. I will now hand it over to Comrade Charles or Comrade Awande, who's going to take us through the next session. Thank you so much, ladies. You can remain our participants. We are now moving over to the next session.
Thank you very much to all our speakers from the previous panel, and thank you very much, Comrade Ruth. I think this is a perfect segue moving from our first panel on the role of women in the climate justice struggle to the book launch on DM7, the Emancipatory Feminism in the Time of COVID-19, Transformative Resistance and Social Reproduction. As we continue to speak and expand on these eco-feminist perspectives, I would like to introduce our speakers for the next panel, beginning with Vishwa Satkar, then Jane Cherry and Courtney Morgan, and Ruth Ntlokotsi. So I'd like to pass over to our first speaker, Vishwa Satkar.
Thank you, Awande, and well, good afternoon to everybody. I'm really happy that the Democratic Marxism series, which I've been editing, is now 10 years old, and it's a collective intellectual project. And today we are launching the 7th volume in that series, Emancipatory Feminism in the Time of COVID-19, Transformative Resistance and Social Reproduction. Like Ariel Saleh mentioned, in the kind of lineage and the kind of inheritance of Marxism, we've had a productivist Marxism and we've had a patriarchal Marxism. And sometimes we've had a Marxism that's blind to racism. The Democratic Marxism series actually is about a decolonial, ecological, feminist Marxism in the 21st century. So learning the lessons of the past and actually trying to reground Marxism, but in dialogue with other anti-capitalisms and bodies of critical thought. Today, Marxism is not hegemonic. It's a disposition, an ideological orientation that cannot just claim to lead the world and to lead movements. It's got to earn its place there. And from the standpoint of the DM series, it's got to earn its place through dialogue and, of course, praxis. We, through this volume, are attempting to intervene in the fourth wave of feminism and actually ensure a dialogue between Marxist feminism, socialist feminism, ecological feminism, and indigenous feminism to kind of frame a conception of emancipatory feminism, a feminism that is about going beyond the current ecocidal, capitalist, and patriarchal system, but also a feminism that is attempting in the everyday to construct the next world, to basically ensure we transform class, race, gender, and ecological relations in the everyday, in the biosphere, and at the level of Earth relations. So this is what emancipatory feminism is all about in its expression in this volume. In the first volume of the Democratic Marxism series, there was a very important chapter co-authored by Meg Luxton and Jackie Koch, both leading feminists. And they challenged us, or invited us rather, to really think about how do we deepen the dialogue between Marxist and socialist feminism on the one hand, given the need for us to really appreciate social reproduction. And on the other hand, how do we challenge mainstream feminism so that it takes on board a class analysis, an anti-race analysis, and so on. But they also posed the issue of what would a kind of resistance of this new feminism look like. And so picking up on that volume 10 years ago, we decided to elaborate in this volume a response. Now, when you pick up this volume and you look at it and read it, you'll come across the word subaltern. And this concept or category is derived from the Italian Marxist theorist Antonio Gramsci. And in his framework, there's a social hierarchy, and those at the bottom of this hierarchy. And in this volume, particularly indigenous women, working class women, peasant women, and generally grassroots women are the subaltern women of our time. And we essentially attempt to foreground, if you like, their struggles. It's to also upend what has been a hegemonic feminism, at least for the past 4 decades, as capitalism has been restructured, a liberal feminism, or a Barbie doll feminism, if you like, all about breaking the glass ceiling, ensuring that a few women are sitting at boardroom tables, there are a few more skirts in the hierarchies of power, and so on. But at the expense of grassroots women, because underlying it, and it came out in the previous panel, is inequality. Those who get this class mobility and make these gains are doing it at the expense of those at the bottom, the subaltern women. So we bring this contradiction into sharp relief, into focus, and to highlight the fact that we need to move beyond liberal feminism, which has been implicated in the reproduction of, if you like, the crisis of grassroots women. In this regard, we kind of embrace social reproduction theory. And as a shorthand, it's really about the reproduction of people and nature. And we look at its lineage in terms of the 3 waves of feminism that we've had before, starting with the Russian Revolution and attempts by feminists there to think about the double burden of women as workers and as caregivers. And then, of course, what happens in the 60s and 70s around social reproduction theory, the engagement between classical Marxism and socialist feminism. And then, of course, what happens after that in terms of an intersection increasingly with ecology and so on. So we argue there's a return in this fourth wave of feminism, of social reproduction theory. But what we do in this volume is position social reproduction theory in an articulation with the general crises of capitalism today, the fourth great crisis of capitalism. So we basically try to challenge the analytical remit of social reproduction theory to help us spotlight and understand the intersections, the systemic tendencies, the interconnections of the current crisis of everything. And then, of course, we stress the importance of the ecological dimension of social reproduction theory, and we try to take it in the direction of what we call socio-ecological reproduction theory. Every chapter in this volume talks to life making around the next world, whether it is women and their attempts to reimagine Pan-Africanism and an ecological feminism today in everyday lives, whether it's women in Rojava attempting to ensure that in liberated territories, feminism is at the center, is shaping the remaking of relations, all the way to South Africa and the myriad of struggles that women are engaged in. So we get a picture of what is transformative resistance, building tomorrow today, transformative praxis, frontlines of everyday struggles in this volume. I must also say that we are alive to the challenges of this emergent feminism. This is not a feminism that's fully baked, that's fully worked out, and so on, but it's a feminism in the making. And for that reason also, we feel that it's important to kind of spotlight it and its challenges. And again, to position it as a counter to sort of liberal Barbie doll feminism. Ultimately, central in all of this is climate justice politics. And running throughout this volume is an attempt to think about how do we make these connections go beyond silos of just labor struggles on the one hand, the silos of community struggles on the other hand, and really think about how climate justice politics can help us aggregate all of this. Thank you, and I'll hand over to the next panelist, Awande. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vish, for giving a comprehensive overview of the Democratic Marxism Volume 7 and what it set out to achieve. So now I would like to hand over to our next speaker, Jane Cherry, and I think Courtney Morgan also may be joining us via some form of presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jane Cherry with my co-author Courtney Morgan here. And apologies that we can't make it to the book launch in real time, but thanks to Ruth and Vish for this opportunity to share a recording of our input. And thank you to all the participants for joining online today. Courtney and I are sharing this presentation and we'll alternate speaking. And Chair, we have aimed to keep this well under 10 minutes. All right, let's begin. Beyond the immediacy of hunger and the practical challenge of providing food to communities who have been denied access, hunger must also be interrogated through a Marxist and ecofeminist lens. Imperialism, colonialism, and globalization have all contributed to the destruction of the planet, as well as indigenous culture and practice. In our chapter, Women and Food Sovereignty, Tackling Hunger During COVID-19, we look at how hunger is a manifestation of that capitalist destruction, and thus how food sovereignty as an alternative not only addresses hunger directly, but also contributes to a movement against these systems. The hunger crisis in South Africa, exacerbated by the 2014 drought, climate shocks, and the COVID-19 pandemic, has deepened powerlessness amongst communities, particularly women. Through this chapter, we looked at how food sovereignty responses to the crisis are providing a strong and viable alternative to the current food system, enabling communities to reclaim their power. So how did we do this? What's in our chapter? We begin the chapter by introducing food sovereignty, which arose as a counter-movement and alternative to the globalization of the neoliberal model of agriculture and the crisis-laden corporate-controlled food regime. Food sovereignty was coined by the international peasant and farm movement La Via Campesina in the 1990s. It arose as a response to multiple crises, including landlessness and hunger, which were exacerbated by the rise of a neoliberal agricultural system. Food sovereignty is defined as the right of peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and their right to define their own food and agricultural systems. It is a system that puts those who consume, produce, and distribute food at the center of the system, instead of market demands and corporate needs. We also look at the unique way in which it has been translated locally by the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign.
We then highlight the links between food sovereignty and ecofeminism, how both have been born out of struggle against a capitalist patriarchal system that centers profit and exploitation instead of people. Essentially, we look at the commonalities in how ecofeminism and food sovereignty are tools used by communities to take back power. We also emphasize that food sovereignty, in the way that it redefines the food system, can be understood as a decolonial process. The way that indigenous groups wield food sovereignty is powerful because it puts up a fight against colonial processes of land dispossession, and it restores cultural processes of growing and relationships with the land, while maintaining traditional practices of recipe and seed sharing in the face of a growing commercial system. We then outline the ways in which women experience crises in society, how often women bear the brunt of crisis. This is true in drought, in the climate crisis, and during the pandemic. We explore the gendered powerlessness of hunger, looking at hunger as more than just a lack of food, but really how hunger is linked to the construction of power in our patriarchal society. In the context of the pandemic, women's practices of buying food or preparing food for the household were disrupted, as well as the household dynamics due to travel restrictions. Women were also impacted by the unemployment crisis brought on by the pandemic, which, paired with rising food prices, left households with even more hunger. When you link this to the unpaid care work done by women in the household already, it becomes clear why, in the chapter, we call for a feminist approach to understanding hunger, to truly build food sovereignty pathways. Thereafter, we explore hunger as a political issue and emphasize that when we talk about solutions, we must make sure to go beyond theoretical solutions, but must really place value on and center the lived experience of people on the ground. To illustrate the transformative potential of food sovereignty, we profiled some of the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign's work, and we interviewed 6 food sovereignty actors, including rural and urban farmers, students, community workers, and activists. Through our research, it became clear that through the practices of these women in South Africa and the experiences of La Via Campesina globally, women have an integral role to play in the food system and beyond. We found that under a number of crises, the crisis of hunger, of unemployment, the COVID-19 pandemic, and even climate change, women are not only affected deeply, and in most cases, doubly impacted, they are also conscious and active agents of change, who are committed to building alternative systems. In particular, women in the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign are wielding 4 types of power: symbolic, direct, movement, and structural power.
Symbolic power, for example, is about the values, principles, vision, and practices that an ideal represents. It is about symbolic actions that provide glimpses of these values and provide hope, but also about living examples to show that an alternative food system based on the foundations of food sovereignty, including democratic control of the food system, is possible. The women we interviewed promote symbolic power through sharing the values and ideals of solidarity and a sense of community, through developing an understanding of the decommodification of food and making use of and promoting agroecological practices, and also taking control of their food system, production, distribution, consumption, in their efforts to feed themselves, their communities, and those in need, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown. We go into detail about each of these types of power in our chapter, so we encourage you to read it for more insights. And finally, to conclude, despite the numerous challenges, the women we interviewed are building grassroots power through food sovereignty, and in doing so are gradually dismantling the racialized, patriarchal, and neoliberal food system through their transformative practices. This approach is in contrast to elite liberal feminism, which assumes gender equality can be achieved in the existing neoliberal economic and food system?
We found that these responses by women are inherently ecofeminist, a strand of emergent emancipatory feminism, because they challenge patriarchal capitalism while building their own emancipatory food pathways, thus redefining power structures in society and building alternatives for food systems at the local level.
A big thank you to both Jane Cherry and Courtney Morgan, who unfortunately were unable to join us today, but were still able to give us some perspective with regards to their contribution to this new volume of the DM series. And now I'd like to move on to our final speaker for this panel, Comrade Ruth Ntlokotsi. Thank you, Comrade Ruth.
Thank you so much, Comrade Awande. I was telling my comrades that they need to get a copy of this book. And you know, comrades will always be comrades. They want copies for free. And I was telling them that even myself, I must buy a book. So meaning that there's absolutely nothing for free. So they must buy this book so that they can get an insight of what we are talking about ecological feminism. I think a lot has been said by my colleagues, comrades, but there's one chapter that I want to just lift up, something that was written by Comrade Asanda Pena. The comrade did a research underground where she shared some of the experiences that women underground are undergoing on a daily basis. And that's reality. We know that mine underground is a male-dominated space. And for them to climatize in that environment, they had to adopt certain tactics so that they can be able to liberate themselves under those conditions. So it was the struggle within the struggle, the support from the trade union, it was not forthcoming. There were victims in the process, and women had to do so many things so that they can be able to liberate themselves in that space. And for me, I think it talks to whether, as the trade unions, are we really winning in terms of advancing the gender agenda, or even defending women, whether underground or in various places, whether the trade union movement has created a space in terms of ensuring that when we're talking about gender, either equality or gender equity, are we truly committed in that sense? Like I said earlier on, that before we started this webinar, I had discussion with some of my comrades and about whether today's date is something that worth to be celebrated, especially from the trade union or not. And listening to Comrade Dora when he was saying that for the method that we are still alive, meaning that there's a possibility of us that we can still continue to wage the struggle. I think from the trade union side, we seem to be losing, whether it's the battle or the war, but I can say that we seem to be losing the battle, meaning that we would require a serious collaboration with different organizations that are truly committed in fighting for gender equality. Like it was said, that gender equality and the struggle for climate justice are interlinked, they cannot be separated. But we seem to be not advancing in that space. We've got progressive policies we went through. We participated in different forums where our intention it was to change the narrative, but when it comes to implementation, I think it's a problem. So that chapter by Comrade Asanda Pena, it is actually telling us that these are some of the challenges that we are going through. It was also said, there's also a chapter that deals with challenges that women in the rural community, either in mining areas, are going through. I mean, the recent experiences of women in agricultural sector. I mean, from the recent storm that was in Cape Town, where we were told that most of our women were either laid off because they were told that the farmers will only accommodate men until such time the situation is stabilized. So that on its own clearly demonstrates the struggles that women in agriculture are confronted with. And from the trade union side, which is, we should be in the forefront of assisting those women. I don't think we are doing as sufficient as possible, especially when it comes to influencing our statute, either through collective bargaining, that those vulnerable women are protected or not. It's a bit of a problem. Maybe I can just cut it short that the struggle should continue. We need to collaborate, work together, read the book so that we get some insight, work with different formations that are having experience so that we learn from them. I think that basically that will be that from my side, but yeah, I think I'll end it there. Thank you so much, Kumita Wande.
Thank you, Comrade Ruth. And just a slight correction, but the volume will be free online, and we will provide the online link for free download in the chat. So just have a look out for that. And now I will be moving on due to time pressure to the closing, which will be done by Professor Vishwa Satka.
Thank you, Wande. I just want to highlight that, joy is the deep secret of struggle, actually. When we come together, we pool our capacities, we learn from each other, we build our confidence and our strength. And we are not at a point, comrades, of runaway global warming. We're not at a point where ecosystems are collapsing completely and irreversibly. A crisis. The danger lights are flashing, if you like, very, very brightly. But in our solidarities, in coming together and the joy of life, we will be able from there to push back. Pessimism of the intellect, yes. Joy of practice, joy of practice. So I want to thank all our panelists that took time to be with us today. Ariel Sala in Australia, Pregs Governor, and of course Dora Marema, and of course those that were on the panel around launching this book. I really think it's important also to acknowledge Ruth as a co-editor of this volume. She's had a very, very busy schedule as a leading trade unionist in this country. And she's been able to ensure that we pull this volume over the finishing line. Thank you. And a big thank you to you, Comrade Ruth. All the contributors in this volume, we would like to express a heartfelt sense of gratitude for your contributions. Your intellectual labor is contributing to sharpening and deepening our understanding and analysis of the crises we are living, but also the kind of points of departure, the doors that are opening, and the exits that we can all pursue. I want to thank the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation for funding this volume, particularly its open access. So the link has been shared with everybody. I've made sure throughout this 10 years that every volume of the Democratic Marxism series is decommodified, and it's available to activists, to communities, to movements, etc. So feel free to download it as a resource, share this in your communities, share this in your activist spaces, share this in your movements. Let's use it as a resource for strengthening our resistance for transformative change. I want to thank the Emancipatory Futures Studies Project, which I lead at Wits University, that also ensured that we pulled this volume together and resourced several of our engagements. I want to thank the Cooperative and Policy Alternative Center for organizing this platform and for ensuring that we create a buzz around the 10 years of the Democratic Marxism series, around this particular volume and the launch. I also want to finally thank all of you for coming and end with this appeal that we are only going to go forward if, again, we build the bridges. We go beyond our silos. So please join the Climate Justice Charter movement. It's the climate justice charter in the world. It was driven bottom up, it was created bottom up, and we are now busy translating it into policies to define the content of the deep just transition, guided by the kind of analysis that's in this book. So please stand with us, work with us, and let's build together. To all feminists here today, come and lead us. That's the call. So finally, comrades, happy Women's Day, but let's make every day Women's Day. So enjoy the rest of the day and take care, and thank you for coming. Over to you, Awanda.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. This concludes our event. The links have been shared in the chat. So for everyone interested in being able to access the free copy, you can now in the link that has been posted in the chat. So once again, thank you to all our panelists for joining us today on Women's Day. And thank you to everyone who made the time also to sit in and share these perspectives with us. We really do appreciate it. And we look forward to advancing these struggles of ecofeminism with you all. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, comrades.